Today on the morning show, it's our day to talk to a couple of friends back in the studio for a monthly visit. Tony Kurtz of the 41st Assembly District and Todd Novak representing the 51st Assembly District in to chat with us today about goings-on. Hello, gentlemen. Good to see you both today.
Good morning, Phil.
Yeah. So how's farming right now, Tony?
Farming, I mean, it's okay. I mean, we've had some pretty decent weather, and so I know a lot of beans have been taken off. A lot of people have got a lot of corn off, especially I think silage is done. I think high moisture is pretty much done. Now it's just waiting for the rest of the corn to dry. I think people put up a lot of hay this year. It was a good year for hay. It was a little difficult sometimes to get it dry, but all in all, I think as far as the commodity side of the house, we're doing okay. I mean, obviously prices could be better. I mean, if you're raising cattle, you're doing pretty doggone good. Dairy's still hurting, and the grain guys are hurting a little bit too. But
little frost in the river bottom as you made your way today, Tom.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see it. But it is the season. I guess we're fortunate. It's almost the end of October, and it's been beautiful. I guess the time is coming soon, so we'll see how it is. So.
I think our colors here are actually nicer than we've had some colleagues up north say your colors down here are much better than up north.
So I think we're at peak. I don't think we're at peak colors yet, are we?
I think we are.
Are we now?
Starting right around there. Yeah, the wind this week might take care of some of that, though. It sounds like
it's going to be a windy week.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to some of the top stories right now. UW Baraboo closing. We learned that last Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you and I talked about it the last time you were on the program, thinking that, obviously you couldn't see the future, but did that come as a surprise to you, Tony?
It didn't. To be very honest with everybody, it's just the numbers. I mean, if you look, and we've talked about it over and over, Phil, about the demographics. And, over the last 10 years, the UW system has 16,000 fewer students than they did 10 years ago. Now, also, let's talk about K-12, because K-12 has 60,000 less students than they did 10 years ago. And once again, it's just demographics. We're having a lot lower birth rates, and so we just don't have the kids like we did years ago. And Baraboo, I kind of saw the writing on the wall, to be very honest, because if you looked at their enrollment numbers that came out in September, they were very, very low. And so now they are the 8th campus of the 13 to close. I think you're going to see others because it's just the numbers. It's just they're competing for X number of students, and those number of students are much lower.
People on the other side will say, though, it's recruitment. Like they don't have the recruiters out there. They're not paying them. What's your response to that?
Recruiters are one thing, but the fact of the matter is it is all demographics. Once again, at the height when Richland, and like I said, it tore me up when we had to close Richland, but once again, at the point when Richland closed, you had roughly 60 students. When you put that into math, it's like $60,000 per student is what we were paying per student. That's very similar to what Baraboo is. I understand people talk about recruiting. At the height of when the 2-year campuses were really doing great, we didn't have online learning. We had a lot larger pool of people graduating high school. One difference is now we have online learning. We have kids that are learning a whole lot differently than they did even 10, 15, 20 years ago. And once again, the biggest issue is just the sheer numbers. And in 2026, you and I have talked about this before, the state of Wisconsin will have the lowest graduating high school class in 2026 than we've ever had. And if you look at that trend, it only gets worse. When you and I were born, you and I were both born in the 60s, the birth rate was basically 25 babies for every 1,000 people. That birth rate now is 15 for every 1,000 people. So just the sheer demographics is what's causing the biggest problem with this. I know people will say, oh, it's funding. Funding does not fix demographics. We can talk until nauseam about it. We just don't have the numbers. And the UW system as a whole has a very large footprint, and unfortunately that has to shrink. And part of this very uncomfortable, horrible process as some of these two-year campuses are the result of this.
Todd, would you like to comment?
Yeah, the chancellor, Platteville Chancellor Tammy called me Wednesday. She's really good about keeping us in the loop. I don't actually. My district borders Platteville, and I have the M, as we call it, in my district. So she's very good about letting her legislators know what's going on. And we meet every quarter down there, Senator Markline and Representative Tranel and I. We knew this was coming. They were down to 126 students, I think. The difference is, though, I think with maybe Richland and Sauk County was ready for this. They knew it was coming because of the demographics. So the county had already has done a study or doing a study on what to do with the facilities. And I believe that's co-op owned by both of the city maybe and the county. So they've been working together. They knew it was coming, so they weren't surprised. And I think they're a little ahead of the game of what they're going to do with the property. And I agree totally with Tony. The demographics, and it's in our school systems too. Our dropping enrollment is becoming such a big problem, and this. It's always, well, just give us more money. It's funding problem, and no, yeah, I totally agree with Tony. We don't have our kids. I've only got out of 14 school districts. I only got one school district that's growing. The rest are dropping. I looked at this third Friday enrollments that just came out, and I've got some problems. I don't, but some of these school districts got some problems. We can't keep filling in that gap. And with just handing more money every year, we've got to figure that out. So we're seeing the effects at the university systems, like the two-year campuses. I think by in a decade they'll all be closed. I think there'll be some universities that will contract or whatever. And also, I think the tech schools though are holding pretty steady. From what I'm hearing, I haven't heard much about the tech schools, but they're so specialized. They're getting more into the specialized area of turning out welders and really changing their curriculum to match the demands of what's needed out there. So, it's going to be interesting few years, unless people start having more kids, I guess. And Tony's way too old for that. But it's just, and I don't know. There's not an easy answer. We can sit here all day, and there's just not an easy answer.
I'm curious, which district is growing in your area?
Darlington.
Darlington, okay.
Yeah, and they're growing quite a bit. So.
And for what reason, or can you see that?
That's Lafayette County is like the most ag-dependent county in the state, and it's all they have a lot of farm workers and families and stuff that are growing, and so it's they're growing.
And of my 18, I have 18 school district that our 41st Assembly District touches. I mean, there's only. Wisconsin Dells is really my only one that's growing. Reedsburg is got a slight growth. So of my 18, I'm very similar to what's Todd's saying. So, I want to make sure I want to emphasize this. When we talk about 16,000 fewer UW students, 60,000 fewer K-12 students, these aren't students moving out. I got to make sure people understand that people aren't moving out. It's just we just don't have the birth rates that we had 10, 15, 20 years ago. People are having less kids. And it's not a Wisconsin problem. It's not a Midwest problem. You look around the United States. You really look around the world. There's some European countries, they talk about a replacement rate, and I hate to get kind of crude, but basically it's what it replaces the population. It's basically 2 babies per person, per woman. And in Europe, there's some places that are like 1. If they say the replacement rate's 2, in the United States, we're about 1.6. So, this is a much bigger trend than just the state of Wisconsin. The the entire nation, and especially a lot of civilized countries, are actually dealing with the same thing. So,
and I think too, and Howard knows this number because he touts it a lot. I think we lost 50,000 students in the state of Wisconsin that never came back after COVID. I think that's what it is. If it's around that, if it isn't, Howard could go right down to it if he was here. But we lost a lot of students that didn't come back to school after COVID that are now being homeschooled and that makes a huge difference. Where they all went, we don't know. But I think the statistics on homeschooling has gone way up. And so there's so many options out there that a lot of parents are making choices not to send their children to public schools. So that's a difference too, but the birth rate is the number one factor.
Switching gears a little bit, another topic is ambulance services and EMS. I know Richland County has a meeting tonight. I think they have a thing going on today at Boaz at 10 o'clock this morning too. But what have you heard about ambulance services and EMS?
Well, this has been an issue not just now. I mean, this is once again a trend statewide. We're having a strain on EMS, and the vast majority of our EMS service, for years were volunteer. Now we're going to more of a paid on call. It costs money. It's expensive. Between the cost of labor, between the cost of training, between the cost of equipment and maintaining facilities. So, over the last several budgets, we've actually tried to reinforce a lot more funding for EMS. 2 budgets ago, we pulled more federal money down to help some EMS providers. This budget, Senator Markline, along with Representative Novak and I, we had a couple bills last week with like First Responders Appreciation Day in the Assembly. Some of the bills that we got across the finish line that we're just waiting for the governor to sign a lot of people don't realize that when an EMS, an ambulance goes out to a scene, they may treat somebody, but yet that individual that was treated can deny a transportation. And the vast majority of commercial insurance, if you don't get transported in the ambulance to a medical facility, you don't get reimbursed. So Medicaid's a little different. If they do they come, they treat you, but yet they don't transport you, Medicaid pays up to $69. Well, $69, that has not been updated for over 20 years. One of the bills we got passed, and once again waiting for the governor to sign, would increase that reimbursement rate from $69 to $175. So if somebody does come out, they get treated, and yet they don't get transported, at least there's going to be some funds going to those EMS providers. It's interesting, I was telling you before we went on air, I've got some areas like the Dells area, over 33% of their calls actually do not get transported. So you can just imagine that, a third of your calls, you're not transporting anybody, and there's potential of not being reimbursed of this. So this was a way to get more money for those non-transport calls. The other thing is we're going to provide money for training, and we're also going to make sure right now in our area, let's say Southwest Tech or even Madison Area Technical College puts on a class for EMRs or for EMTs or for paramedics. If for some reason they don't fill that class, they'll actually cancel the class. And, for like a Madison or Milwaukee, that's not a real big deal. But when you cancel a class here, especially when those individuals are taking their time out to come out and do the class, it's a big deal. So what we would do is we would actually make sure the tech colleges holds the class. We will backfill those seats, but also then we would open those statewide to anybody that needs that training, because once again, it is a statewide problem, and this is just some ways to get some more funding and training opportunities for those providers.
Todd?
Yeah, every ambulance service in my district is dealing with the same thing. A lot of mine are going to full-time to help, which is expensive, but you have to go there. I know when I finished my term as mayor of Dodgeville, we were transitioning to full-time because that's part of the problem, especially in the very rural EMS districts, is, they can't afford to go to full-time, but they don't have the staff. So we're running into some real problems. And I think, coming when I got elected in 2014 to compared to now, we've really worked hard every session to change the EMS rules and try to get more money in EMS and stuff so we can have more people go to training and join these crews. And I think it all comes down to how we get them to where they need to be. It's just, you have, I've heard it several times myself of, they'll call for an ambulance and nobody, they don't get a full crew, so they have to call the town 20 miles away to have them come out. And especially in my rural areas, that happens more frequently, and it's very unfortunate. So we've got to pull every tool out of the toolbox to try to help these areas.
Well, that's the importance of the mutual aid agreements. Especially with some of our smaller rural fire departments, they are really struggling for volunteers. And one of the bills that I have introduced, and it's working through the legislative process, is to allow districts, fire and EMS districts, basically at least 8 municipalities could join together, and then they could do. Right now, they can do that, but this would provide a little bit more funding flexibility to help with the funding, because that, in the end, it's expensive. And like Todd said, years ago when you had more of a volunteer base, that's a lot more reasonable, obviously cost-wise, than going with a full-time. And you're seeing a lot of our EMS providers having to go to a full-time because, once again, you just don't have the volunteers like we had 10, 15 years ago. And once again, it's more expensive because you're paying people a full-time salary.
It's a crisis situation, though. I mean, I understand some of these townships, their hands are tied, but they can't really afford it.
Well, and the thing is, and Todd can correct me because he's the local government. I mean, townships are required to provide.
Yeah, right.
EMS, and so it is expensive. And I think, once again, this kind of piggybacks on the conversation we had a few minutes ago about demographics. I truly want people that are listening to think about 10, 20 years ago and the number of volunteer organizations that just like I said, they relied on. It doesn't matter if it's American Legion, if it's the VFW, if it's a Lions Club, if it's your fire department. We don't have the volunteers like we did 10, 15, 20 years ago. And why? Is it because, once again, demographics, we don't have the numbers, people are so busy, there's so many different things going on. Fill in the blank. It's a combination of things. It's just, I said this to a group a few months ago, there's probably going to be a point, especially in rural areas. I mean, you're already seeing in some of our cities where you might have to have a full-time fire department. And that's where I don't think, as constituents, we go, oh, what does that look like? Well, it's expensive, all right, and it costs money. Otherwise, what's the alternative? To your point, when we dial 911, we expect somebody to pick the phone up, and we expect somebody to hopefully come out to our house. In some parts of northern Wisconsin, there was, especially last year, when you dialed 911, you might have got somebody to answer the phone, but you didn't have somebody coming out. And I think that's where that is a basic function of the government is, we need to provide security and protection to our constituents. And part of that is making sure that when you dial 911, someone's going to be picking up the phone, but also someone's going to be coming out to help you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, life or death situation. And Todd, too, full-time people, I mean, they're going to expect a decent wage. I mean, that's...
Oh, it's not cheap, full benefits,
yeah.
Everything. But, you need them, and anybody that does that kind of work, they should make good money and stuff like that. And they're on call usually 12, 24-hour shifts, and so it's not an easy job. So I admire anybody, but to Tony's point, it's EMTs, fire, everything. There's just not the people out there anymore, and even your little festivals that used to be 10,000 people to the town for the weekend, they can't get people to volunteer to help anymore, and the people that did all this stuff are getting older, so it's I don't know, we can go back to like schools. There's just not the people out there that used to be, and people like Tony and I are getting old, and we can't do stuff anymore. I mean, it's just we got to make a lot. There's gonna be a lot of adjustments, I would say, coming up in the next 10, 15 years. So.
But also, Phil, to your point about, so the training curriculum for EMRs. These are folks that come out and basically provide the first aid. These are your first responders to the scene, and EMTs, paramedics. The training requirements for them, they look at like scope of practice and the different things that they have done over the years. That hasn't been, the training hours have not been updated. So last year, the medical examining board in the state of Wisconsin for the EMS providers, they actually updated a lot of the training requirements. So that added now more training to our EMRs, our paramedics, our EMTs. And so same thing with our, you got a wonderful fire department here in Richland Center. Once again, those young men and women that volunteer to be in there, they have certain training requirements they have to do. I mean, they're basically doing everything that a full-time person is doing in Milwaukee or Madison, but yet they're doing it on a volunteer basis, and that is all out of the goodness of their own heart. And so to Todd's point, it costs money. And so if you take that model of those folks being volunteers and now you move them to a paid, it is a shock, because people complain about costs and obviously property taxes and things like that. Well, if you want the service, it has to be paid for. And right now we have truly benefited from so many volunteers for so many decades that, I wish I had a better answer. I don't. It's just something that I know for Todd and I and Senator Mark Line, and it doesn't matter who you are. These are some of the things that we have to struggle with, but we also, it keeps you up at night because it is an issue.
If you do go to some sort of districts and things like that, would you face a referendum then?
So the way the districts would work is if you wanted to do one, if you could all form a district, and all municipalities would have to obviously agree to it. But obviously, if you wanted to raise the funds to pay for it, you would actually have to go to a referendum. In other words, so the 8 districts, if it's the city of Richland Center and 8 townships around, yes, they would have to form a district, and then yes, they would have to go to the voters and say, hey, we need, $10 per person. The voters would have to approve that, just like they do have to do for school referendums. And I think, in my humble opinion, that gets the community more involved in what is going on, because if it's going to cost you money, you should have a say in that, and that's one of the things we're working on right now. We had a good hearing. We're just waiting to do a couple little changes on that bill and then introduce the amendment to that.
Okay, sounds good. We'll be back with more in a moment with Representatives Kurtz and Novak on today's morning show. On the morning show from WRCO Radio, we have Tony Kurtz and Todd Novak representing the 41st and 51st districts, respectively. We've tackled some pretty heavy issues here so far in our area. Prisons, that's another big topic statewide. Tony?
Yeah, I know that's something that we've looked at, and obviously in the state budget we've talked about closing Green Bay, which needs to be closed. It's something that I know the governor wants to do. I know we have a couple of our colleagues, Representatives Stephan, Representative Bourne, are very passionate about looking at the prison system. I will say this, it's kind of funny, on Saturday I was out and about in the district up by Linden Station for their fire department's open house, and talked to a couple prison guards from the new Lisbon facility, and I just asked him, I said, how's things going? And he said, we're doing pretty well. And, same thing with Boscobel, those vacancy rates for a lot of those prisons, even New Lisbon, which is a medium security, they were at a point of 30%. I know Boscobel was at almost 40%. Those have actually, the vacancy rates are a lot better. They're less than like 1%, 2% at those locations respectively. The big problem still is Green Bay and Waupun. Those are our oldest prisons. What I always try to tell people is, those prisons, if you ever saw the movie Shawshank Redemption, those prisons were literally built in the late 1800s. And so they need to be taken down. It's just, what's the replacement for that? And there's a lot of good ideas out there, but the bottom line is just getting both parties at the table to find out and hammer something out that what are we going to do? It's going to be expensive. I will just tell you this, a new prison is well over $1 billion. If we remodel Waupun, it's still going to be $600, $700, $800 million to do that. So either way we do it, we need to do it right. But part of that equation and part of that conversation is closing Green Bay, and then what do we do with Waupun?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it comes down to the two different. We do need to build. I'm for replacing those prisons. And part of it comes down, the governor has a different philosophy that we should let more people out to deal with some of the overcrowding up there, which doesn't really sit well with a lot of folks. So there's that dynamic of this too. And it's not easy. We voted, I don't know if Tony was in there, to close Lincoln Hills up north, which is a juvenile detention center. And it was supposed to be closed by now. And we found out, even working with Governor Evers, I think we voted to close it under Governor Walker. Mm-hmm. And, it's supposed to be closed by now, but working with the governor, and that's something we're all on page to close this. It takes a long time to figure out what we're going to do with offenders, and so there's not an easy solution, but definitely Waupun and Green Bay need to be replaced. Green Bay is terrible. You're talking Wild West type prison, just like Tony said, the old movies. And it's overcrowded, and there's some issues. But the vacancy rates have come way down as far as staffing, and we really increased wages a lot in the last couple budgets, and so that helped tremendously because they weren't making what they should have, and they were working so many hours of overtime, and they were burning themselves out. So we kind of, at least around here, have addressed those vacancy problems as far as staff.
Talk about another tough job. That is one right there, too.
I've toured prisons before. I wouldn't want that job for... They deserve every penny they make. I've been to Boscoville, and they do a good job down there, but I wouldn't, I wouldn't do that job for nothing. I went to visit Tony. No, I'm kidding.
But part of the Lincoln Hills and the juvenile facilities, it's some people, it's kind of goes back to not in my backyard, so we've had a lot of problems with where do you place a new facility. And just like, if we do build a new prison, it should be somewhere in that Waupun, Green Bay area because of the workforce. I mean, all the guards and correctional officers that work in that area, we want to make sure that if something does get remodeled or built, it's going to be up in that area because of the skills of those correctional officers. And it's interesting, even Richland County. I mean, I've gone door to door in this beautiful city, and there's people right here that live in Richland Center that work at Boscoville. And so there's more in this community than people think about, working and driving back and forth.
Another thing you wanted to talk about, some grants that are available. Do you want to explain?
So as between the federal government, state government, I mean, everything's going to grants, and there's a reason for that. But what we find is our larger communities, like Reedsburg, a little over 10,000 people, they have somebody on staff that actually kind of do grants. Whereas, somebody here in Richland Center, you're not going to have anybody dedicated to doing grants. So what we're finding, our larger communities have that skill set within their group. Our smaller communities don't. So Senator Markline and I introduced this to the tail end of last session, and it passed the Assembly. It did not get a vote in the Senate. This time, we tweaked it, and basically what it was, we will provide grants for communities below 7,500. So, it could be Bloom Township, or it could be this, the city of Richland Center could apply. It's going to be a very simple form. It's going to be like a one-page form to say, hey, we want to apply for XYZ grant, and the state would provide up to $5,000 for, Richland Center could actually go out and get a grant writer and pay that individual to actually write the grant, to do all the due diligence of what they're looking for in the grant. And it would just give a lot of our smaller communities kind of a level playing field with some of our larger communities that have that skill in-house. And so that's something we got great bipartisan support. It's something I think will probably pass in the Assembly probably in November. And I can't believe the governor wouldn't sign something like this. So.
You have a lot of communities in your district that are 7,500 or less.
Oh yeah, and I'm on the Southwest Regional Planning Commission. I'm a commissioner. I've represented Iowa County for 15 years, and they do a lot of grant writing to help a lot of these communities now. But I think too, we're talking some of these townships. They have a town board, a patrolman, and a clerk treasurer, and that's it. Nobody has and there's money sitting there that they could maybe access, and different grants, and they don't have anybody to write it for them because some grants are very complicated, and so I know that Southwest Regional Planning, like I said, they help a lot of municipalities write grants, but we need to help our municipalities, or small ones especially, try to get every dollar they can. And we've come to this realization, and I'm glad. We need, Tony's right, we used to put these pots of money out there and they'd be gobbled up by the Madisons and the Milwaukees of the world. And I'm on the WIDA board, the housing board. I represent the Assembly, and one of the reasons I wanted on there is because all this huge amounts of money for housing was going to Milwaukee, and Madison, and Senator Quinn, who's up north, he's on too. And we really push, we need to come up with programs and get money to the rural areas for housing, and I've seen a change in that too. There's a WIDA development going up in Dodgeville, and I think I got one in Lafayette County, and that's what our big push is, like Tony and I and Howard, to get this money out here, and that's why it's important. That's why they created. We all worked on ARIP for rural roads, is because all this funding was getting taken up. I always tell people out here, we could live off what they spend in southeast Wisconsin for roads, seriously. And it's a fight for rural legislators to try to get some of that pot. So this is just a small piece, but it'll help our smaller municipalities.
Does the money have to be used for a specific thing?
Nope.
These grants?
Well, let me take that back. It has to be used for. It can be used for cybersecurity. It could be used for infrastructure. Roads. A treatment plant. Whatever. It just has to be used for infrastructure. But we did put the cybersecurity thing in there because that is. Obviously, in our day and age, that's getting to be, unfortunately, more and more of an issue, especially for a lot of our smaller municipalities. I know there's a county that actually has some issues with cybersecurity attack right now. So those are the type of things that we also help, and they can apply for a grant to help with that as well.
This government shutdown thing that's going on, we've been hearing about that for 3 weeks now. What have you heard? Any sign of that changing, Tony?
I'm a little surprised it's gone on as long as it has. I mean, it hasn't affected anything right now. It has affected some that I'm aware of. I know there's some issues with some of our hospitals right now with some of the way they pull down federal money that not an issue yet, but if it continues on much longer, it could be an issue. But I wish it get over too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's. I think that's the. I didn't think it'd last this long, but this is the part of politics that I don't like. It's there's no reason this is happening, but for political reasons, and the public is the ones that suffer. Yep. And right now, I mean, it's manageable, but if it goes on too much longer, I think there's going to be some pain, and it's going to come down to our level. So,
and I think that's why I think we both try to stress that. Fortunately, the state of Wisconsin is not in that situation. If for some reason, we can't do a budget, or if we can't, all we do is stay under the old budget. And so we will never, ever, it's on our Constitution that we can't, shut down. And I think that's something that I personally value as a state. We should be very proud that we will continue. But I do think, to Todd's point, they need to get both sides at the table and work something out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's easy for us on the outside to think about why, it just makes sense. Why can't they get anything done?
Well, it makes it harder because it gives a perception that that's the way things are. I mean, in all levels of government, and that's not true. I mean, Tony and I have no problem. We work together with the other side of the aisle, and we're actually, people think we all hate each other, and at least at our level, at the state level, most of us are friends. We may argue at a committee hearing or on the floor, but some of my closest friends up there are on the other side of the aisle in a party, but this gives all people in my position a bad look because they think we're all like this, and we truly aren't in the state of Wisconsin. I don't think in this assembly, at least, or the Senate. And Tony's right. Budget's supposed to be done by June 30th. I think the latest since I've ever been in office, we passed one in September or end of August or September. Everything kept rolling. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I want to stress to Todd's point. Every bill I've talked about, they've all been bipartisan. The bills Todd's talked about, they've all been bipartisan, and I think that unfortunately, we focus on the negative all the time, but 94% of our bills will all have bipartisan support of the state of Wisconsin. So I think that's a good thing.
And sometimes we only hear a part of the story.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
It's true.
We'll be on the floor in a session in the assembly, and let's say, for example, have 40 bills up that day, and they'll all pass bipartisan unanimously. Maybe a couple speeches here or there, but there'll be one bill we get hung up on for a half hour, 45 minutes, and we're going back and forth, and that's the front page of the paper, and that leads the nightly news, and that's kind of what's frustrating with me. And I tell people this, especially when I'm doing doors, they say, why can't you guys get along? And I said, we do. It's called in my world theater, and Tony knows that. Mm-hmm. We live it, and it's just what it is, and I wish people could really see the inside of how we work together and the things we do. So,
yep, absolutely.
And I could be debating a Democrat on the other side over a bill and hollering at each other, not nasty, and then 5 minutes after we're done, we're back in the back of the assembly parlor eating lunch together. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's today. How are the kids? What are you doing this weekend? I mean,
reminds me of the old cartoon, Ralph and Sam. Where
but it's true. I mean, when I especially during the budget time, I go to Madison, and I'll typically stay Tuesday and Wednesday night because I'm, and the place I stay is right next to the Capitol, and Democrats are there, and we actually sit down and have breakfast together. I know that's shocking to people, but those are the type of things that actually do happen, and unfortunately doesn't get necessarily covered.
I'm not so sure it happens in D.C. like that, but it does in Madison.
Yeah. Again, I would guess you're probably right there.
Yeah.
Somebody had a question about the current Blue Book. How's the best way to get one of those?
So Blue Books, we just 2 weeks ago got the brand new shipment, and so just contact myself or Representative Novak or Senator Kieski or Senator Markline. We'd be happy to get one. Matter of fact, when I'm done today, that's what I have a list of a couple Blue Books that I'm going to be dropping off here in the Richland Center. So please just contact our office. Be happy to get you one.
Yeah, and we'll get it to you either mail. I like to deliver the ones I can personally, and in my district, or mail them out. We'll get them one.
Good trivia stuff in there. Todd, you were named to the Speaker's Task Force on Elder Services. I saw that in one of your releases.
Yeah.
It's very fitting.
Yeah.
I just turned 60, so that's, I think. And I've been, even before I was elected to Assembly, I've been very involved with elder services, ADRCs, and social services. When I was at the newspaper, I've been a court-appointed volunteer guardian for elder people that can't take care of themselves, their finances or health decisions, probably 35 years. And I'm on the ADRC board in Iowa County. Elder issues are very important, and as we have an aging population, which we talked about earlier, that are affecting the demographics, I apologize, we need to make sure they're well taken care of. I was on a Speaker's Task Force on Alzheimer's and dementia before, and so this is something that's in my wheelhouse that I really care about, truly. So And I think our first hearing's in a couple weeks. Maybe one out here. They're talking about having one somewhere in southwest Wisconsin. So we want to talk to the local people involved with elder services and the ADRCs and stuff and saying, what do you need? What can we do? And then we'll put out a package of bills to hopefully address. And I'm assuming they will be bipartisan and work with the governor and get what we need to do.
Pretty important. I mean, we have a pretty older demographic here in the county and the city as well.
We do, and that's why to Todd's point about the ADRC, tomorrow morning I'm going to go tour the ADRC up in Juneau County, and it's something that over the last two budgets we've provided more funding. I want to do more because obviously, to your point, we do have an aging population, and the ADRCs in our area do a tremendous amount of work. And they do great work.
They do good work, very good work.
Yeah. Anything else either you'd like to add today? We've covered a lot of topics.
Are we done already?
Well,
one thing I do want to mention, so this week we'll be introducing a bill. Basically, it's to provide and put on the radar more assistant district attorneys for communities. Last budget we added approximately 40, but my big gripe with the way we did that in the budget was we were using older data, so they would do what they call a workforce analysis of how much work the ADAs have, the assistant district attorneys in everybody's office. The issue with that I have is for the 25-27 year budget, we are using data from 21, 22, and 23. In other words, we use an old data set for the 25-27 budget. And the excuse that I got was, well, that's the only data we have. Well, that's not necessarily true. New data comes out in July. So this year, in July, we had the new data, so we could have done that different averages for 19, the year 22, 23, and 24. And if we would have done that, like Richland Center would have got, a little increase, and they would have got another 0.2% or 2.2 position for ADA. Sauk County would have got another 1, and this bill basically would just say, hey, you got to use the most updated workflow analysis when you start putting ADA positions in the counties, and that's something. Obviously, our ADAs and our district attorneys do a tremendous work, but they need people in the office to help them make sure people are held accountable for the crimes they commit.
Mm-hmm. Todd, anything else you wanted to add today?
No, I agree. We need to support our courts and ADAs. And, most of my county, I think all my counties are one county DAs and one county judges. And so it's important that especially we give the support. Lafayette County, until 4 years ago, only had the DA, no ADAs. So we're fortunate to get one for that. So that's really important. So, but no, whatever Tony puts out, I'll support.
We got that on record now. So. All right. Thanks, guys, for coming in today. We'll see you next month. Yeah, Tony Kurtz representing the 41st Assembly District and Todd Novak of the 51st Assembly District on today's morning show.